The battlefield was a symphony of chaos, each note played by the shriek of alien artillery and the desperate cries of human soldiers retreating under the relentless onslaught. Smoke hung low over the shattered remnants of the once proud colony city, its towering spires reduced to jagged silhouettes against a crimson sky. Captain David Cole wiped blood. He wasn't sure if it was his, from the corner of his mouth, and barked orders into his comm unit. His voice, hoarse but steady, cut through the cacophony. Pull back to the second line. Keep the civilians moving. We don't hold this ground, we survive. The soldiers under his command obeyed with grim efficiency, their faces pale beneath helmets smeared with soot. David caught a glimpse of a young private helping an elderly man limp toward an evacuation shuttle. The private's rifle dangled uselessly at his side, its ammunition long spent. David looked away before he could see what happened when the alien drones inevitably caught up. He didn't have the luxury of mourning anymore. The enemy, the so-called Galactic Empire, advanced with the precision of a predator closing in for the kill. Their infantry units, tall, insectoid creatures with iridescent exoskeletons, moved in perfect unison, protected by shimmering energy shields that deflected the humans' outdated ballistic weapons. Above them, sleek alien gunships hovered like vultures, unleashing plasma bolts that melted through steel and flesh with equal ease. David clenched his fists as he watched another pocket of resistance disintegrate under the Empire's firepower. This wasn't war. It was annihilation. Humanity was hopelessly outmatched, its last bastions of resistance scattered and dwindling. Earth itself had fallen months ago, leaving the surviving colonies as the final, flickering embers of a once proud civilization. "Captain Cole, sir." A voice crackled over his comm. "Shuttle 3 is full. We're lifting off now." "Roger that," David replied. "Get those people out of here." The shuttle's engines roared to life, and David watched as it ascended into the sky, weaving through enemy fire. For a moment, he allowed himself a flicker of hope. Maybe some of them would make it. Maybe the future wasn't entirely lost. But then the gut-wrenching hiss of a plasma bolt tore through the air, and the shuttle exploded in a brilliant cascade of fire and debris. David's jaw tightened, but he didn't flinch. He had seen too much to flinch anymore. "Captain!" A soldier stumbled up to him, panting and bloodied. "They're breaking through on the west flank. We can't hold it. Fall back to the ridge," David ordered, already moving toward the crumbling defensive line. "We'll make our stand there." The ridge wasn't much, a shallow rise in the terrain with a few scattered boulders for cover, but it was all they had. As David scrambled into position, he noticed a weariness in his soldiers' eyes. These men and women had fought for weeks without rest, their numbers dwindling with each passing hour. They were running on fumes, and they knew it. David was about to rally them for one last push when a low hum filled the air, growing louder by the second. At first, he thought it was another enemy gunship, but this sound was different, heavier, more deliberate. Then he saw them. A line of sleek, black transports descended from the sky, their hulls marked with the insignia of the United Earth Defense Front. David's heart leapt. Reinforcements? Here. Now. The transports landed with surgical precision, and their doors hissed open to reveal a squad of soldiers unlike any David had ever seen. Clad in matte black armor that seemed to drink in the light, they moved with a predatory grace, their weapons sleek and alien in their design. At their head was a tall, broad-shouldered man with piercing blue eyes and a face carved from stone. "Who the hell are you?" David demanded as the man approached. "Colonel Jackson Jones," the man replied, his voice calm and measured. "Green Berets?" David frowned. "Green Berets? Those are a myth. Some Black Ops fairy tale." Jones smirked, but there was no humor in it. "We're very real, Captain, and we're here to save your ass." Before David could respond, Jones turned to his squad and issued a series of rapid-fire commands. The Green Berets moved with terrifying efficiency, taking up positions and engaging the advancing enemy with weapons that tore through the aliens' energy shields like they were made of paper. The tide of the battle shifted almost instantly. David watched in stunned silence as the Green Berets cut through the enemy ranks with a level of precision and lethality he hadn't thought possible. One of them, tall, lean, and impossibly fast, vaulted over a boulder and took down 3 aliens in quick succession, his rifle spitting blue fire. Another calmly planted a charge on an enemy gunship, leaping clear just as the explosion tore it apart. "What are they?" one of David's soldiers whispered, awe and fear mingling in his voice. David didn't have an answer. Within minutes, the battlefield was unrecognizable. Where there had been chaos and despair, there was now a coordinated, relentless assault. The aliens faltered, their perfect formation fracturing under the Green Berets' onslaught. It was the first time David had seen the Galactic Empire's forces retreat. As the last of the aliens withdrew, Jones approached David again, his armor streaked with blood and grime, but his expression unshaken. "We need to talk," Jones said. David crossed his arms. "I don't know who you are or where you came from, but you just did what the rest of us couldn't do in weeks. What's the catch?" Jones's gaze hardened. "The catch is that this war isn't over. Not by a long shot. What you've seen today is just a fraction of what we're capable of. But if we're going to turn the tide, we need every able-bodied soldier ready to fight. That includes you, Captain." David stared at him, weighing his words. Part of him wanted to resist, to cling to the skepticism that had kept him alive this long. But another part, the part that had watched an impossible victory unfold before his eyes, knew better. "All right," David said finally. "I'm in." Jones nodded. "Good. Then let's get to work." The 2 men shook hands, and for the first time in months, David felt something he had almost forgotten: hope. The mission briefing was conducted under the dim light of a ruined bunker, its walls scarred with the evidence of countless battles. Colonel Jackson Jones stood at the center of the room, a towering presence in his black combat armor, his voice steady and unwavering despite the gravity of the situation. Around him, the Green Berets listened in silence, their faces hidden behind the reflective visors of their helmets. Captain David Cole, still adjusting to the surreal nature of his new allies, leaned against the far wall, arms crossed as he studied the men and their commander. "Our target is a Galactic Empire communications relay," Jones said, gesturing to a holographic projection hovering above the cracked table. The image displayed an alien structure nestled within a rocky canyon, its design sleek and utterly foreign. "This relay coordinates all enemy operations within a 1,000-kilometer radius. Take it out, and we cripple their ability to respond to our movements. It's a small window, but it's a start." David shifted, his skepticism tempered by what he had witnessed on the battlefield earlier. "And what about the defenses?" "I doubt the Empire left this place unguarded." "They didn't," Jones replied. His tone suggested he welcomed the challenge. "Automated turrets, drone patrols, and at least 1 platoon of infantry. Nothing we can't handle." David couldn't tell if it was arrogance or absolute confidence, but either way, it was hard to argue with the results the Green Berets had delivered. Still, he felt compelled to press further. "What about extraction? Once we blow this thing, the entire area will be swarming with enemy reinforcements." Jones turned to him, his blue eyes sharp and unreadable. "We won't be there long enough for it to matter. Stick close, Captain. You might learn something." An hour later, they were moving through the darkness, the Green Berets almost ghost-like in their precision and silence. David followed at the rear, his pulse hammering in his ears as the team navigated the rocky terrain toward the relay station. Every so often, one of the Berets would signal a stop, raising a hand as their heads tilted slightly, listening for threats no ordinary soldier would detect. David felt like an amateur in their presence, his every breath and step painfully loud by comparison. The station loomed ahead, its angular silhouette illuminated by faint, blue-green lights that pulsed rhythmically like a heartbeat. David could see the automated turrets perched along its perimeter, their barrels slowly sweeping the area. He crouched behind a boulder as Jones gestured for the team to fan out, their movements seamless and practiced. "Cole," Jones whispered, his voice barely audible over the faint hum of the station's machinery. "You're with me. Stay low and keep up." David nodded, gripping his rifle tightly as he followed Jones through the shadows. They approached one of the turrets, its sleek, alien design a reminder of the Empire's technological superiority. Jones held up a fist, signaling a halt, before producing a small, disc-shaped device from his belt. He pressed it against the turret's base, and within seconds, the weapon fizzled and went dark, its system silently overridden. "How?" David began, but Jones cut him off with a sharp gesture. "No questions, not now." The team moved closer to the station, neutralizing defenses with a precision that bordered on mechanical. As they reached the outer wall, one of the Berets, a hulking man whose name David hadn't caught, produced a small cutting tool that emitted a focused beam of energy. In seconds, a section of the wall was removed, creating an opening just large enough for the team to slip through. Inside, the air was cool and sterile, a stark contrast to the rugged terrain outside. The corridors were eerily silent, their smooth, metallic surfaces reflecting the faint glow of alien runes etched into the walls. David couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, though the Berets moved with such certainty that he forced himself to push the thought aside. Jones raised a hand, signaling a stop as the team reached a junction. He pointed to a door at the end of the hall. "That's our target. Control room's inside. Once we plant the charges, this place is history." David followed as Jones led the way, his senses on high alert. The door slid open with a soft hiss, revealing a spacious chamber dominated by a central console covered in glowing alien symbols. At least half a dozen Empire infantry stood guard, their insectoid forms bristling with weapons. The moment the door opened, their heads snapped toward the intruders. "Engage," Jones ordered, his voice cold and calm. The room erupted into chaos. The Green Berets moved like a single, coordinated organism, their weapons blazing with blue-white energy that tore through the enemy's shields and armor with surgical precision. David dove behind a console, firing bursts from his rifle as one of the aliens charged toward him, its bladed limbs glinting in the pale light. His shots found their mark, and the creature collapsed in a heap, but not before its weapon discharged, sending a bolt of searing plasma inches from his head. Across the room, Jones was a whirlwind of destruction, his movements impossibly fast and efficient. He dispatched one alien with a well-placed shot to the head before turning to another, using the butt of his rifle to knock it off balance before finishing it with a point-blank blast. David could only watch in stunned admiration, his own contributions to the fight feeling insignificant by comparison. Within minutes, the room fell silent, the last of the Empire's soldiers crumpling to the floor. Jones wasted no time, moving to the console and placing a series of charges along its surface. He glanced at David. 30 seconds. Let's move. The team retraced their steps, their pace quick but controlled. As they exited the station, David heard the distant whine of approaching engines, enemy reinforcements, drawn by the disturbance. His heart sank. They weren't going to make it, but the Green Berets didn't falter. One of them, a wiry man with a calm demeanor, planted a final explosive on the station's exterior before turning to the others. "Ready?" The explosion was deafening, a brilliant flash of light and heat that swallowed the relay station and sent a plume of smoke and debris into the sky. The reinforcements arrived moments later, but by then, the Green Berets and David were gone, slipping into the shadows as though they had never been there. When they finally regrouped at the extraction point, David leaned against a rock, his breathing ragged. Jones stood nearby, his expression unreadable as he scanned the horizon. Despite the success of the mission, there was no celebration, no sense of relief. The Green Berets carried themselves like men who knew this was only the beginning. David wiped sweat from his brow and looked at Jones. "You do this kind of thing often?" Jones turned to him, a faint smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Every day. Welcome to the war, Captain." David didn't respond, For the first time, he truly understood what humanity had been missing in its fight against the Empire. And for the first time, he felt a glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, they could win. The skies over the devastated colony world churned with storm clouds, their thunder a distant rumble that seemed to echo the tension on the ground. Captain David Cole stood at the edge of the makeshift command post, his arms crossed as he stared out at the horizon. His uniform was streaked with dirt and blood, a testament to the weeks of relentless fighting. Despite their recent victories, a gnawing sense of unease refused to leave him. The Galactic Empire would not let their losses go unanswered. Behind him, the Green Berets worked with quiet precision, preparing for what Jones had ominously referred to as the pivot. Their actions were deliberate, purposeful, each movement a cog in a larger machine that only Jones seemed to fully understand. David had grown accustomed to their efficiency, but it still left him feeling like an outsider. Even after weeks of fighting alongside them, he couldn't help but wonder what kind of training or conditioning created soldiers like these. "Captain." Jones's voice cut through his thoughts. David turned to see the colonel approaching, his black armor gleaming faintly despite the grime of battle. Jones held a tablet displaying a complex map of the region, his expression as unreadable as ever. "We need to talk." David raised an eyebrow. "That's never a good start." Jones smirked faintly, but didn't rise to the bait. Instead, he handed the tablet to David, who studied the map with growing apprehension. A series of red markers dotted the landscape, converging on a single point, their current location. "They figured out what we're doing," Jones said, his tone calm but firm. "The Empire's mobilizing everything they've got to take us out before we can gain any more ground. If we don't move now, we're done." David's stomach tightened. "You're saying we're walking into a trap?" Jones shook his head. "No, Captain. We're going to set one." David frowned, his gaze flicking back to the map. "You're talking about the Citadel." The structure was visible even from their current position, a towering monolith of alien design that loomed over the landscape like a specter. It was the Empire's central command hub on the planet, heavily fortified and bristling with defenses. Jones nodded. "If we take it, we cut the head off the snake. The Empire loses its ability to coordinate, and we gain the foothold we need to push them off this rock." David stared at him incredulously. "That's suicide. We barely made it out of the last mission alive, and now you want to storm their headquarters." "It's not a matter of want," Jones replied, his tone icy. "It's a matter of necessity. You've seen what's out there, Captain. We don't have the luxury of playing it safe. This is our only shot." David looked away, his jaw clenched. He hated how much sense Jones made, hated even more that he couldn't come up with an alternative. Finally, he nodded. "What's the plan?" The colonel's smirk returned, sharp and predatory. "We hit them where it hurts." The assault began under the cover of night, the Green Berets moving like shadows through the dense, rocky terrain that surrounded the Citadel. David followed close behind Jones, his rifle at the ready as they approached the first checkpoint. The air was thick with tension, every sound amplified in the oppressive silence. David's grip on his weapon tightened as they closed in on the alien sentries, their insectoid form silhouetted against the faint glow of the Citadel's lights. Jones raised a hand, and the team froze. He gestured to one of the berets, a wiry soldier named Kane, who nodded and slipped forward with almost supernatural stealth. Within seconds, the sentries were down, their death silent and efficient. David suppressed a shiver. He had seen death before, but never delivered with such precision. As they moved deeper into the Citadel's perimeter, the scale of the structure became even more intimidating. Its walls were impossibly high, constructed from a material that seemed to shift and shimmer in the dim light. Turrets and drones patrolled the area, their movements erratic but deliberate. The entire place felt alive, as if it were watching them. Jones led the team to a narrow access point, barely visible against the Citadel's seamless exterior. Kane worked quickly, using a device that emitted a faint, high-pitched whine. After a tense moment, the wall slid open, revealing a dimly lit corridor that stretched into the heart of the structure. "Stay close," Jones whispered, his voice barely audible. "And stay sharp." David followed the team inside, his every sense on high alert. The interior of the Citadel was a maze of corridors and chambers, their alien architecture disorienting and oppressive. Strange symbols pulsed faintly along the walls, casting an eerie light that seemed to shift and dance in the corner of his vision. He couldn't shake the feeling that they were intruding on something ancient, something that didn't belong to them. The team moved with practiced efficiency, neutralizing patrols and avoiding detection as they made their way toward the central command chamber. David tried to focus on the mission, but his mind kept returning to the sheer audacity of their plan. This wasn't just a strike against the Empire. It was a declaration, a statement that humanity wouldn't go quietly into the night. They reached the command chamber without incident, the massive doors sliding open to reveal a sprawling, circular room dominated by a central console. The walls were lined with alien technology, their functions incomprehensible but undoubtedly vital to the Empire's operations. At the far end of the room stood an alien figure unlike any David had seen before. Taller and more imposing than the insectoid soldiers, it radiated an aura of authority and menace. Jones didn't hesitate. "Engage!" The room erupted into chaos, the green berets spreading out as the alien commander unleashed a barrage of energy blasts. David dove behind a console, firing off bursts from his rifle as he tried to process the sheer ferocity of the encounter. The commander moved with terrifying speed, its movements fluid and almost serpentine as it evaded their attacks. Jones was a blur of motion, his rifle spitting blue fire as he closed the distance between himself and the commander. Kane and the others provided covering fire, their shots precise and unrelenting. David focused on taking out the drones that swarmed into the room, their weapons blazing as they tried to overwhelm the team. The battle felt like it lasted an eternity, but in reality, it was over in minutes. The commander fell with a final, defiant screech, its body collapsing in a heap of iridescent armor and alien ichor. Jones wasted no time, moving to the central console and planting a series of charges. "We've got 3 minutes," he said, his voice calm despite the urgency of their situation. "Move!" The team retraced their steps, their pace quick but controlled as the Citadel began to tremble around them. The charges detonated just as they cleared the outer perimeter, a massive explosion lighting up the night sky and sending a shockwave that nearly knocked David off his feet. He turned to Jones, his chest heaving as he tried to catch his breath. "We did it." Jones's expression was grim, his piercing blue eyes scanning the horizon. "We've turned the tide," he said. "But this war is far from over." David nodded, a flicker of determination igniting within him. For the first time, he felt like they had a real chance, not just to survive, but to win. The battlefield stretched before them, a scarred wasteland of shattered earth and twisted metal. The air was heavy with smoke and the acrid tang of burning fuel, mingling with the distant cries of soldiers locked in desperate combat. Captain David Cole tightened his grip on his rifle, his gaze fixed on the towering silhouette of the enemy command spire looming in the distance. This was it, the final push. Victory or annihilation. There was no middle ground. Colonel Jones stood at the center of the forward command post, his presence as commanding as ever despite the chaos around him. His armor bore the marks of countless battles, yet he carried himself with an unyielding resolve that seemed to inspire everyone around him. The Green Berets were scattered throughout the camp, making their final preparations. Each man moved with a quiet intensity, their purpose clear. "We've broken their lines," Jones said, his voice steady and authoritative as he addressed the assembled soldiers. "The Empire's on the back foot, but don't mistake their retreat for weakness. They've concentrated their remaining forces around the command spire. That structure is their last stronghold, and it's our objective. Take it, and the planet is ours." David stepped forward, his voice cutting through the tense silence. "And if we fail?" Jones's piercing blue eyes met his, unflinching. "Then humanity loses everything, The weight of those words settled over the group like a shroud, but there was no room for hesitation. They all knew what was at stake. The battle for the command spire would decide the fate of the war, and possibly the future of their species. The plan was straightforward, yet impossibly daring. The Green Berets would lead the assault, carving a path through the Empire's defenses and creating an opening for the main force to follow. It was a role that required both precision and sacrifice, and David knew the odds of survival were slim. But as he looked around at the faces of the men who had fought alongside him, he felt a surge of determination. They had come too far to turn back now. As the first light of dawn pierced the smoke-filled sky, the assault began. The Green Berets moved with deadly efficiency, their coordinated strikes dismantling the enemy's outer defenses in a matter of minutes. David followed close behind Jones, his heart pounding as they advanced through the maze of trenches and barricades. Every step brought them closer to the spire, but also deeper into the heart of enemy territory. The Empire's soldiers fought with a ferocity born of desperation, their insectoid forms swarming like a hive defending its queen. The ground was littered with the bodies of the fallen, human and alien alike, as the battle raged on. David ducked behind cover, firing bursts from his rifle as he tried to keep pace with the Green Berets. Their movements were almost inhuman in their precision, each action calculated to maximize impact. "Keep moving." Jones's voice rang out over the din of battle, a beacon of order in the chaos. David pushed himself forward, his muscles screaming in protest as he sprinted toward the next piece of cover. A plasma bolt sizzled past his head, close enough to singe the air. He didn't stop. As they closed in on the spire, the resistance intensified. Automated turrets rained down, suppressing fire, forcing the team to take cover behind the remains of a shattered transport. Jones scanned the battlefield, his mind working at lightning speed to devise a plan. "Kane, take out that turret," he ordered, his voice calm but urgent. The wiry soldier nodded and moved with practiced stealth, his figure blending seamlessly into the smoke and debris. Moments later, the turret exploded in a shower of sparks, clearing the way for the team to advance. David followed Jones up a narrow incline, the spire now looming directly overhead. Its surface was a sleek, obsidian black, pulsating with an eerie, otherworldly light. The air seemed to vibrate with energy, a constant hum that set his teeth on edge. This was the heart of the Empire's operation on the planet, and its presence was almost suffocating. They breached the spire's outer wall with a well-placed charge, the explosion echoing like a thunderclap. Inside, the air was cool and sterile, a stark contrast to the chaos outside. The interior was a labyrinth of corridors and chambers, each one more alien and disorienting than the last. Strange symbols glowed faintly along the walls, their meaning indecipherable but undeniably significant. "Stick together," Jones said, his voice a low growl. "We're not alone in here." David didn't need to be told twice. The oppressive atmosphere of the spire was enough to keep his nerves on edge. They moved as one, their footsteps echoing softly in the vast, empty halls. Every shadow seemed to conceal a threat, every sound a potential ambush. Their objective was a controlled chamber at the spire's core. It was here that the Empire's leadership had retreated, their last line of defense against the advancing human forces. Jones led the way, his every movement radiating purpose. David followed, his senses on high alert as they navigated the alien structure. The first attack came without warning. A squad of Empire soldiers materialized from the shadows, their weapons blazing with lethal precision. The Green Berets responded instantly, their training and reflexes honed to perfection. The corridor became a deadly gauntlet of energy blasts and desperate maneuvers, each side fighting with everything they had. David found himself cornered, a towering alien bearing down on him with a wickedly curved blade. He raised his rifle and fired, the shots tearing through the creature's armor and sending it crashing to the floor. His breathing was ragged, his heart racing as he looked around for his next target. Jones was a whirlwind of destruction, his rifle and blade working in tandem as he cut through the enemy ranks. His movements were impossibly fluid, each action calculated for maximum efficiency. David couldn't help but feel a surge of admiration and envy for the colonel's prowess. In this moment, Jones seemed more than human. The battle ended as abruptly as it began, the last of the Empire's soldiers falling in a heap of twisted limbs. The team pressed on, their pace quickening as they neared the control chamber. Time was running out. They burst into the chamber with weapons ready, only to be met with an alien figure that exuded authority and malice. The Empire's commander stood at the center of the room, its form shrouded in a shimmering, almost liquid-like armor. It spoke in a guttural, alien tongue, its voice reverberating through the chamber like a physical force. Jones didn't hesitate. Engage! The final battle was unlike anything David had ever experienced. The commander moved with inhuman speed, its attacks devastatingly precise. The Green Berets fought with everything they had, their movements synchronized as if guided by a single mind. David found himself locked in a deadly dance with the alien, each moment a test of his skill and resolve. It was Jones who delivered the final blow, his blade slicing through the commander's armor and into whatever passed for its heart. The alien let out a guttural roar before collapsing, its body disintegrating into a pool of iridescent liquid. The chamber fell silent, save for the faint hum of the spire's machinery. Jones moved to the central console, planting charges with practiced efficiency. "We're done here," he said, his voice heavy with exhaustion. "Let's move." They exited the spire just as the charges detonated, the explosion consuming the alien structure in a massive fireball. The ground shook beneath their feet as the spire collapsed, its destruction marking the end of the Empire's hold on the planet. David looked to Jones, his expression a mix of relief and disbelief. "We did it." Jones nodded, his face unreadable. "This is just the beginning. The Empire won't stop until we force them to." David followed his gaze to the horizon, where the first rays of sunlight pierced the smoke-filled sky. For the first time in years, he felt a glimmer of hope. The war was far from over, but for the first time, humanity had struck a blow that truly mattered. They had proven that they could fight and win,